Still waiting for that person who was introduced to stand up. Wow. Norris, I know you're looking toward retirement, but we could probably use somebody in our marketing department. I had no idea all that would be said. Seriously. First, I want to thank you for this opportunity to speak. I'm going to have trouble with the wind here. I've never used note cards or a script before. I usually speak off the cuff, but with it being this hot, I don't want to start rambling, you understand. But seriously, I want to thank you for this opportunity, but I think on behalf of this crowd, this community, on behalf of the men and women whose names honor our walls, I want to thank the Memorial Park Committee for keeping America's heroes, their names, their lives, their sacrifices, forefront in our minds. And for that, I want to tell you, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, honored veterans and those who love them, I stand before you a relatively young man. I have a few gray hairs, unfortunately ever increasing in number. But like Elihu in the book of Job, I realize that my words should probably be the last to be uttered in this audience. There are many of you men and women who are wiser than I, and so I approach what I'm about to say with a lot of concern, a lot of respect, because I know that 10 years ago the words that I'm about to utter were not mine, and I know with the wisdom of 10 more years that these words won't be mine any longer. Before I get to my comments, whenever there are a bunch of veterans around, I know you guys want to hear a good story or two, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about my Air Force experience. I entered the military in an odd way. I got into medical school at Duke, and tuition for medical school at Duke is $250,000. I looked at my savings account, my future earnings, and realized I was going to be about $250,000 short. And so I turned to my Uncle Sam, and he agreed to foot the bill if I would serve as a combat physician for him for 4 years after my training. I enjoyed Duke. I enjoyed medicine. But through my training, I realized I didn't like doctors very much. I don't think I've been to see one since I got out of medical school. When it was time for me to be done and to go into my service, I asked the Air Force, is there anything else I could do? And they said, oh, yes. They didn't want to get rid of their investment. They said, yes, what we'll do is we'll make you a flight surgeon. And then if you like that, then we'll train you to be a backseater in an F-15. And I said, that sounds good. I like fun stuff. And they said, well, yes, and when you get through with your flying duties, then you can take care of the troops who need medical care. All right, I was young, and I said, sure, that sounds great. Now, you can say what you want to about government bureaucracy and waste, but I guarantee you our government got their money out of me. There were times I would deploy to a country, and I would be the only American doctor there, or maybe even the only NATO doctor there. I was run ragged, but you can do that in your 20s. Most of my good war stories are actually classified. Not that the government has classified them, but I've classified them need to know. And with my mother in the audience, she has not much need to know. I've been out of the house for over 20 years, been out of the military for about 3 years now, and still, my mother would have nightmares. If she knew that a few months after September 11th, me and my front seater were in an F-15, and that it was thundering, lightning, soupy, as they say, and that about 6 hours into our 8-hour sortie, we were messing with our night vision goggles, and that before we got finished, we realized that we had unawareingly flipped upside down and were screaming toward the ground and only pulled up with a few seconds to remain. Or if she knew that my wife was a few months pregnant with our first child and that I had no life insurance at the time, she would I have nightmares, so I will not tell that story. Instead, I'll tell you the story of the first night that I felt afraid. Operation Southern Watch, we were flying low near the Iraqi border, when all of a sudden there were these lightning-looking things zipping up from the ground. I'd never seen tracers or anti-aircraft artillery. I didn't know what they were. I was perfectly happy about it. Then all of a sudden, a well-meaning flight lead comes in the helmet and says, "Boys, don't worry about that. That AAA is completely randomly fired by soldiers on the ground. They'd have to be really lucky to hit you." You see, I grew up in the South, and I've done some dove hunting. And my favorite marksmanship technique with dove hunting is firing randomly up in the air. And I've hit a dove or two. So I know that flying objects can be brought down with random fire. And I wasn't very happy about being shot at, randomly or by aim. I remember the adrenaline of landing and doing those things when I was younger. And I remember thinking in my barracks, this war stuff is fun. At the dawn of my fourth decade, I stopped flying, and I returned to the military medical system full-time to complete my surgical training. This was during the really build-up of combat in Afghanistan and Iraq. And this was the first time I really saw war in the hospitals here stateside. Daily, soldiers would be evacuated to these Army hospitals with devastating eye and face injuries, many permanently blinded and most disfigured beyond belief. I remember standing tall, honorable, speaking to these soldiers, speaking to their families, telling them what we were going to do to take care of them, standing there respectfully answering questions, full military bearing, and then turning and walking away, finding the closest bathroom, sitting down, and sobbing like a baby. Those months were some of the most challenging of my life. And it was during this time, this difficult time in my life, that many of us who were caring for these fallen warriors began to contemplate what the true meaning of sacrifice was. Not just death, but disfigurement. Loss of limbs or vision or function or face for one's country. And now I have a very different perspective on what it means to honor the fallen. You see, throughout history, every culture and country, every society sets forward these days to honor those who've fallen for king and country. And don't get me wrong, Memorial Day and Veterans Day and Pearl Harbor Day, these days are very, very important. But they cannot be our only remembrance of our veterans. In America, these holidays must be the beginning of our salute to these people. If a Memorial Day is our the only homage paid to those fallen for our country, then we're like the man that old preacher talks about, who shows up at Sunday morning and throws a 5 in the plate and then goes out and he lives like a heathen the other 167 hours of the week. It's just lip service.